The title of this unit is HIPAA Solutions Part 1. Next slide. During this unit, we will talk about how to conduct a risk analysis and how to prepare for it, and also we will talk about the audit program, how to conduct an annual audit, and also the required periodic audits that are referenced in the HIPAA security rule. Next slide. Now, risk analysis. The HIPAA security rule and the red flag rule require regular risk analyses, not just one-time only event. This is not something you do once, forget about it, and move on. A number of organizations have already conducted a risk assessment. They did it in 2005 when the security rule was final, but they haven't conducted one since. And now, especially given the red flag rule requirements, it's very important that a risk analysis be conducted on a regular basis and incorporate both the requirements in the security rule and the requirements in the red flag rule. Now, data that's collected is very valuable in risk management, policy and procedure development, disaster recovery planning, identity theft protection, and in fact, the whole security program. Your risk analysis is, in a lot of respects, the foundation for a good or sound security program. And the robustness of that security program is measured and should be measured on at least an annual basis through a full risk analysis. And the purpose of this particular section of this unit is to talk about how to go about conducting that risk analysis. Next slide. Now, there are three different types of risk analyses. One is called a quantitative, and it attempts to apply independently objective monetary value to risk components via actual cost or formula, potential losses via actual cost or formula. It's more difficult to perform, but may be more pervasive, objective, and able to calculate return on investment. Many times it's based on the actual cost. This is not something that's often used in the healthcare field. It's more used in what I would call the technology fields, manufacturing, and so forth. It's not generally used commonly in the healthcare industry. The qualitative analysis is a narrative description of a risk analysis without ranking. The return of investment is considered, but it's not integral to process. And this is actually one of the more common ways that a risk analysis is conducted in the healthcare industry. Next slide. Now, the third type is the ranking approach. And it's a combination without strict financial values. It allows for determining the probability and the criticality of potential incidents, and it can be used to determine and prioritize and allow focus of the covered entity. It's easier to associate with budget, and it's less time consuming than the quantitative method, and it uses a high, medium to low categorization, and there can be some gradations depending on the size of the organization and how granular the organization wishes to get. Now, the following is an example of a combination of a qualitative and a ranking approach, and this is often seen in the healthcare industry. The qualitative, being subjective in some respects, will give you in many ways similar results, if not the same results, as the quantitative method. It just will not provide you necessarily the financial values and make it as easy to conduct a return on investment as far as what you will see as a return based on your investment in risk mitigation. Now, ranking approach allows you to provide some value to each of the risks so that you can determine how you wish to mitigate those risks. You're determining which risks are low, medium, or high so that you can proceed with the actual mitigation process, and also on the other side determining which risks you are willing to accept. Next slide. Now, what are the steps? The first step is an inventory of assets. That includes data, hardware, software, people, business processes, many of the things that go into an organization, and in fact all of the things that go into an organization. It's not just your hardware and software. It also includes your people, and includes your data, and includes your facilities, and so forth. After you conduct your inventory, you identify the threats and the vulnerabilities that could impact your organization. You evaluate your existing security controls. How are they protecting you against someone taking advantage of a vulnerability or a threat occurring? Following that, you assess the likelihood that a particular event would have or would occur, and then you would consider the impact on the organization, or what would the cost be. And it's not only financial cost, but it would be things like reputation, potential lawsuits, things like that. Based on that, you determine the risk. And the risk is a combination of looking at, after you've evaluated threats, vulnerabilities, and security controls, looking at what's the likelihood on one axis and the impact on the other, and then you determine what the risk is to the organization, and you can rank that in a high, medium, and low fashion. Now, in a lot of respects, the complexity of a risk analysis will depend on the size of an organization. Smaller organizations will look at something that's relatively simple. They have a smaller inventory, and it's far easier to keep track of the different parts of the inventory. It's more encapsulated, whereas if you have a more complex or larger organization, your assets may be spread across multiple facilities. They may actually be spread across multiple states. And then it's more of a complex activity that requires more time and effort to gather the initial inventory and to conduct the analysis, because the analysis may be contingent upon where a particular facility is located versus another facility in the same organization. Next slide. Now, what are assets? Hardware. It includes your portable hardware. It's your software, your applications, your electronic medical record, your data warehouse, your claims adjudication system. It's your facilities, both standalone facilities as well as leased space within a larger facility. Data storage locations such as on your network, portable devices and media, shared storage, archiving, backup storage, hosted storage. It's looking at modes of data transit. How is the data transmitted from one place to another? This would include both paper and electronic. It's looking at the data sensitivity, because your data sensitivity, the value or the risk associated with that data is going to be higher. The risk is going to be higher depending on how sensitive that information is. As an example, if you are an alcohol and chemical dependency treatment facility, the sensitivity of that data is extremely high versus, say, a primary care physician, where the sensitivity of that data it's sensitive, it needs to be protected, but it's not as highly regulated and highly protected as alcohol and chemical dependency information. You also need to look at your primary users, both internal and external. This means business associates, other covered entities, trading partners, third-party contractors for business associates. These are the people that will be key to your mission-critical operations, so that as you're looking at your risk analysis, you're looking at what happens if those users are not available and I cannot perform a certain mission-critical activity. What is the risk to the organization and to the audience or the customers served by that organization? Next slide. Now you identify your threats. You have natural or environmental disasters, electrical storms, flood, tornado, chemical spill. You have human threats, accidental data entry or deletion, internal inappropriate access for personal use or out of curiosity. You have hackers, viruses, malware, theft, vandalism. And you look at your vulnerabilities, our internal weaknesses or flaws, such as technical, physical, or administrative, and your personnel. As an example of a vulnerability would be, there's a patch that was released for the firewall, and that patch was not taken advantage of. It was not applied. So therefore, there's a vulnerability in that firewall because a security patch was not applied. One of the things to think about when you're looking at threats and your vulnerabilities is you're looking at what is reasonable. As an example, if you live in an area that's on a floodplain, it is likely that you need to consider that a flood is going to occur. If you don't, though, if you are, say, in Denver, Colorado, and you're in a higher location around the Denver community, and floods aren't likely, that's not something you would necessarily want to worry about. What you would want to worry about, though, would be disasters or threats associated with high snowfall, avalanches, and things like that. So again, you're looking at what is your environment, what is the threat associated with that. If you're in a low crime area, yes, that's still a risk that you want to at least think about, but versus somebody who is in a high crime neighborhood, that is not as high a threat and something that you're going to spend as much time as contemplating as you would in a high crime area. So again, it gets back to what is reasonable. You don't want to look at every single potential threat or vulnerability that may be associated with your organization. You are looking at what could reasonably be expected. And that goes back to the very basis of the security rule. If you look at the security rule, it speaks about reasonable throughout the whole rule. And it talks about reasonably insuring, and it's looking about what is reasonable to your organization and so forth. Next slide. Now, what are some of the physical threats? How to identify those? Well, you walk through your office. As an example, if you're walking through your office and you notice that you're on a higher floor, you have a storage room that's used to store paper charts that have been archived, and there's a window with a hasp block on it, and right outside that window is a fire escape ladder. Well, that could be a significant risk. There's a threat that somebody can easily break into that room and access the protected health information that is stored in that room. So it's just walking through the office and seeing what is around. Do I have computers that are right by the window and in plain sight? Those would be threats. It's develop and use a walkthrough survey based on a security rule, physical security safeguards. So as you have developed your physical security safeguards, you have also developed what are the policies and procedures, what are the requirements around that, and you're looking to make sure that you've adequately protected against that, and if you haven't, what are the threats associated with that. You're looking at visitor access. How easily can a visitor enter the facility? Are they escorted past the reception area into restricted areas? Are they required to wear badges? Can they just walk right through? Looking at alarm systems, and this is more than just the alarm on the door when the office is closed. This is also looking at alarms on, say, windows of rooms that may be used to store technical equipment, may be used to store hardware and software, may be used to store charts. It's also looking at alarms on systems, such as an intrusion detection system will have an alarm where it alerts somebody that there is a potential intrusion that is being perpetrated at the moment. Then somebody can take some action to work to block that. So it's not just physical alarm systems, but it is taking those into account. It's what are your administrative threats? It's the presence or absence of policy and procedure. If you have the appropriate policies and procedures in place and you have trained your workforce on it and you enforce those policies and procedures, there's less likely a threat there that there will be carelessness, that there will be actions taken out of ignorance by the workforce members. So there are threats associated with the absence of current, up-to-date, complete policies and procedures. It's looking at how accountable the workforce is. Is accountability, sanctions, is that enforced across the whole workforce? Is everyone treated as equally as feasible? Sometimes not always feasible, depending on where you're at in the organization and what level, that there will be some exceptions, but generally looking at how the security program, the privacy program is enforced, see how equally it's enforced, if it's enforced on a consistent basis, if there are certain controls in place that are monitored, such as audit logs, to reasonably ensure that appropriate activity is occurring and that inappropriate access is not occurring. It's looking at the presence of training. Am I training my staff on a regular basis? Have I provided periodic security reminders? Do I require my staff to re-sign their employee confidentiality agreement on an annual basis? Training is very important. It's associated with policies and procedures. Training is one of the foundational elements in making sure that you have an enforceable security program and that you've added strength to that security program, because keep in mind that administrative threats are the most significant threats to an organization. And if the workforce is not aware of what they are required to adhere to, what will happen if they misuse data or they inappropriately disclose data, then you have a very weak program, and you have threats that are associated with the lack of administrative safeguards, policies, procedures, and so forth. Next slide. Now you want to evaluate those security controls. So you've looked at what are my threats and vulnerabilities. Now you want to evaluate what security controls do I have in place. First type of security control is a preventative. It's access restrictions. It's looking at minimum necessary, both internally and externally. It's making sure that an individual, say you've implemented role-based access control, that based on the position that that individual fills, that the access to the systems and the data is appropriate to that position, and that they are not allowed more access than necessary. Now, in some cases, especially with smaller organizations, an individual may have expansive access to a whole host of things, but that's based on the size of the organization. Larger organizations, there should be a separation of duties, and there should be controls in place to only allow access as needed to fulfill that particular function, which in a large organization will be spread across more than one individual. It's looking at authentication. Are you using multi-factor authentication, such as passwords, biometrics, security tokens? Effective staff training is a preventative measure. Personnel management, background checks, looking at work history. Environmental controls, such as a sprinkler system, alarms, making sure that there are locks on doors. Now, what is detective? That's following after you've looked at your preventative security controls, you look at your detective. Those are audit trails, audit logs, audit programs. Those detect something that may have already happened. Alarms versus antivirus applications, malware detection, intrusion detection, firewalls. Their purpose is to, as an example, with a firewall, I have a transmission that is either coming into the network or leaving the network. The firewall's responsibility is to look at that and say, is that appropriate? Now, the transmission has already started. Now, it needs to determine whether it needs to stop that transmission from occurring or continuing, either outbound or inbound. Next slide. Then you assess the likelihood. What's the nature of the specific threat or vulnerability? And it's creating a matrix, considering what's the threat source, motivation, and capability. How motivated would somebody to take advantage of that threat, and how easy is it to take advantage of that? And it's looking at the existence and the effectiveness of current controls. If there is a high motivation to take advantage of a threat, then are there strong security controls in place to prevent taking advantage of that particular threat? And then it's looking at the likelihood. It's balancing between threat and controls. If it's high, then controls are needed. If it's medium, controls are appropriate. And it's balancing that against your business requirements, because you don't want to have too much security. Too much security can result in hampering the business of taking care of patients, processing claims. It's more a matter of looking at it from the perspective of, what do I need to have in place so that I can reasonably ensure my business continues, but I'm also protecting the information that has been entrusted to me, that I need to operate my business, that I need to operate my practice. And if controls are cost effective, then you implement them. If they're not, you document that. Those are things that there's a low likelihood that something will happen, and if something does, if a threat is realized, then there is likely little impact to the organization. In that particular case, you could very well say, I will accept that risk. If you do accept the risk, you need to make sure that you document that risk. Next slide. Now, when considering the impact, you determine what is the adverse impact to the practice, to the health plan, to the business associate if the threat is successful. You need to consider how important is the activity affected. How critical is the system or the data to operations? How sensitive is the information? Other external adverse impacts, such as loss of business, civil lawsuits, regulatory action. Now we have increased penalties, the increased chance of security and privacy audits. So it's looking outside, not only at what is the damage, it's also starting to look at some of the intangibles, like reputation, loss of business associated with that reputation damage. Next. Now, when you're considering the impact in large organizations, systems and information owners will determine the impact level for their systems and their information. Smaller organizations may designate one person who is very knowledgeable of all of the systems to determine the impact for the whole organization. So, as you can see, in larger organizations, it's more likely that the risk analysis process will be broken up across department, across data owner, business owner, and so forth, versus in a smaller organization, it may rest with one individual who's very knowledgeable and wears multiple hats. Next slide. Now, in considering the impact, you need to describe the potential impact as the loss or degradation of any one combination of integrity, availability, or confidentiality of the protected health information. And getting back to the intangible and indirect impacts, they include lost revenue stream, repair, personnel costs, civil liability, public loss of confidence, and loss of credibility. Next slide. Now, your impact of data. What happens if the data is released inappropriately? What happens if it's misused? Say there is identity theft or medical identity theft? What if the data is manipulated inappropriately or it is corrupted? What happens if you temporarily can't get at that data? Say you're in an emergency room and you need access to that data because you have someone who's in critical condition in front of you. That data needs to be available. What happens if the server with the electronic medical record goes down? What happens if the major claim system that processes the bulk of all claims that are received by a health plan goes down, so that health claims that are received back up, they cannot be processed in a timely fashion, bumping up against state prompt pay laws? So it's looking at all of the aspects of